I was on board a large catamaran in Key West Harbor watching a motorboat race on the morning of Friday, November 13, 1994. Conditions were gusty. I was standing at the stern of the boat, looking toward the rear. The mainsail jibed suddenly, which means that it came around to the other side of the boat with incredible speed and force by a change in wind direction, and the end of it caught me on the side of the head and knocked me off my feet and down a hatchway headfirst. Fortunately, someone on board had a cell phone and called the Coast Guard, who were nearby because of the race. The Coast Guard came and took me ashore to the hospital. I can remember parts of this. They checked me out in the emergency room and gave me a CAT scan which showed multiple skull fractures and that my sinuses were filled with blood. Then the emergency room staff hooked me up to an EKG machine in a side room. Outside there was a sudden noise of helicopters and pandemonium in the emergency room. Following my accident, a motorboat in the race tipped over and the driver and throttle man were trapped underneath for 15 minutes. They were brought in by helicopters. While they were trying to save these men, one of whom died, they left me alone in the side room. The next thing I remember is being outside of my body and being able to fly around the room. I remember being delighted at being able to propel myself around. I went up to the ceiling and looked at the light fixtures close up, noting the detail of them and how they were made. Then I looked down and saw my body still lying there, and there was a man that looked a little like a doctor leaning over it. I flew down for a closer look. He was dressed in what at first seemed a lot like a hospital robe. It was yellow, almost like it had gold in it. And he wore a pillbox-type hat which looked a little like the kind of cap a doctor wears in surgery, except this was more like a hat and it had writing on it in an alphabet I did not recognize. However, it might have been Hebrew or something related to it. He held objects that looked similar to crochet hooks. They were gold or bronze in color, and he was using them to do something to the side of my head where I had been hit. Then he said something to me like, "Well, you won't get too many chances to recover from something like this again. You must be much more careful in the future or you won't be able to do what you have to do, and that won't be good." It was as if he didn't say it in so many words, but I understood it as complete sentences. Then he said, "Now stop fooling around by flying around and get back into your body and ask someone for water and a blanket." I did what he said, and in an instant he disappeared and I could feel myself zipping back into my body. Soon as nurse walked by and I asked her for water and a blanket. She brought the blanket, which felt really good, and she let me wet my mouth with a little water. Then I went to sleep. I had a cervical biopsy because I had had a PAP, cervical smear, which indicated it was needed. This was done in an obstetrics gynecologist's office. I began to feel dizzy and told her I felt that I was going to faint. She had me lie down and I fainted. She called the doctor. According to him, there was no pulse when he got there. During the time I was out, I had the most joyful experience of my life. The joy and ecstasy I felt was beyond description. I was with a presence which felt like a male. I felt fully alive. I felt warm and very loved. We were in a loving situation, like a welcome of a very loved one who had been away a long time and had returned. The emotion was much stronger than any I have ever before or since experienced. When the doctor resuscitated me with CPR, I felt as though I had been thrown at a very high speed through space and then hit a solid wall. I was afraid when I woke up and didn't know where I was. I thought I was being attacked and tried to claw the doctor's face, which wasn't mine. I felt disoriented for the rest of the day. The doctor told me that the cervix was very sensitive and could trigger the vagal nerve response that I had. I had another experience 10 years later after having had thyroid surgery. The next day I was suffocating to death because my nerve to my vocal cords had been touched during the surgery and the vocal cords were paralyzed and there was swelling which blocked my airway. I was floating off and looked back at myself on the bed with the doctor there working on me. I thought to myself, I am dying, this can't happen, I feel too peaceful. I can't go yet, I have a small child. They then knocked me out, so I didn't feel any more. They had called my husband at home to come because I was dying and they felt there was nothing they could do. I also had an experience when I was 3 and having my tonsils out. I can clearly remember watching the surgery being done as though I was up on the ceiling. This was really strange to me after I recovered from it. I remember it well and have talked about it all my life. I have always been very intuitive and a little psychic. I'm sensitive to all environments and living things. I know when things are going to happen. On the night of September 10th, I was in the Bolivian Amazon region with my family on a boat trip. We were sitting around a campfire with the captain of the houseboat we were on. I had had no alcohol or drugs, which I never have, so my mind was clear. We were enjoying the peace, being all alone in the jungle with no one around for miles. Suddenly, I saw explosive lights in my head and felt a strong sense of fear. A voice entered my head and said, "Don't worry, you are all safe here." I told my husband about it when we got back to the boat. I can stand next to a person and tell what profession they are. I have trouble in crowds because of all the energy which affects me now. I tend to seek out nature.